Ladies and gentlemen, шановні пані та панове, good morning to those joining us from Canada і добрий вечір всім, хто
And good evening, everybody who is watching us in Ukraine.
I'm the Trade Commissioner for Creative Industries at the Embassy of Canada to Ukraine, and I will be moderating our You Can Co-Produce conference today. While we are coming together, let me mention that you can watch the broadcast of the conference both in English and in Ukrainian. You can choose the language of your preference. Both versions are available on YouTube, and there is an additional Ukrainian stream on Facebook page of the Ukrainian Motion Pictures Association. For those who watch in Zoom, please pay attention to a globe icon down the screen. It is called interpretation. You can click it and you can choose the language, and you can similarly listen to either Ukrainian or English version. I will say the same in Ukrainian. Шановні гості,
Dear guests, so please, this broadcast can be watched both either in Ukrainian or in English languages. You can choose the stream which you like more at the YouTube, or if you're joining us in Zoom, please pay attention to the globe icon, which is located at the panel down there at the bottom, and you can choose the channel of the language which is much more comfortable for you to listen.
So it's a great pleasure for me to open this event. The You Can Co-Produce conference is dedicated to the new status of the Canadian-Ukrainian audiovisual relationship. It is called the Treaty Co-Production. As we all know, the Canada-Ukraine Audiovisual Co-Production Treaty is now in effect. But what does this mean, a treaty co-production, both in general and in terms of Canadian-Ukrainian relations? What does it mean to producers? What are the benefits, advantages, and support programs? How can a producer find a foreign partner? What does it take to obtain an official co-production status in Canada and in Ukraine? So many questions, and we will get all of them answered today, hopefully, thanks to our amazing speakers. So let me introduce them for you. Richard Colvin, Counsellor, Political and Public Affairs, Embassy of Canada to Ukraine. Yulia Shevchuk, Deputy Head of the Ukrainian State Film Agency. Anna Volkova, International Relations Executive Officer, Ukrainian Motion Pictures Association. Alexander Maximchuk, Assistant Consultant to the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Film and Advertising of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. Sharolta Chete, Director for Development and Corporate Affairs at the Canadian Media Producers Association. Marielle Poplin, Specialist for International Business Development and National Representative for Canada at Eurimage, Telefilm Canada. Susan King, Analyst, Co-Production Administration, Business Affairs and Co-Production at Telefilm Canada. And the practitioners who will present the case study of the international co-production project, The Maiden Dance to Death, Michael Dobbin, producer at Quiet Revolution Pictures, and Andrew Hills, writer, director, producer, and actor. Before I hand it over to our first speaker, there's one important thing that I want to encourage everyone to do during the conference. Ask questions. Please ask as many questions as you want. You can do so anytime in the comments to the YouTube or Facebook broadcast, or here in the Zoom chat if you're watching us in Zoom. Just enter your question and indicate a speaker who you would like to ask it. We will have 2 dedicated Q&A blocks, 15 minutes at the end of each block, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can. And now, without further ado, I invite Richard Colvin, Political Counsellor of the Embassy of Canada to Ukraine, for welcome remarks. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Daria. Daria. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce this conference, which is dedicated to the launch of the Canada-Ukraine Audiovisual Co-Production Treaty. This treaty will inaugurate a new era of audiovisual collaboration between Canadians and Ukrainians. We are delighted that some 150 attendees from Canada and Ukraine are with us here today. To those of you taking part from Canada, good morning. And to our Ukrainian partners and colleagues, dobry wieczór, pani ta panowie. Я дуже радий бути на цій конференції, присвяченій новій ері аудіовізуального партнерства між Канадою та Україною. Today's conference is called You Can Co-Produce. It is an invitation for every audiovisual professional to think about the amazing content you can create together. Canadian and Ukrainian producers who co-produce under this new treaty will benefit not only from the extraordinary combination of talent and skills that we see in this virtual room today, but also from more robust financial, promotion and distribution opportunities, as well as a larger international stage for your projects. As a co-production partner, Canada has a great deal to offer: financing, tax credits, world-renowned locations, and expertise. We make well over 50 co-production projects each year. We have a treaty or memorandum of understanding with 60 countries. We were the first non-European country to join Your Images, and we like Ukraine. Kanadцы дуже люблять Ukrainu. Could there be better reasons for us to co-produce? If there are, we will hear them today from our speakers, who include industry professionals, government officials, and content producers. We thank all the participants for joining us today, those who came to learn more about the new co-production opportunities, and especially those who came in search of a co-production partner. We also thank all the applicants for all 292 projects that were submitted to us for pitching. We would have loved to allow all of them to pitch online. Unfortunately, because of time constraints, that's not possible, but we will make all projects available electronically to the participants. At the Embassy of Canada in Ukraine, one of our core objectives is to further strengthen the rich and dynamic cultural, business, and people-to-people relationships between our two countries. I am confident that this conference, online pitching, and subsequent business-to-business meetings will indeed persuade many of you here today that, as the name of today's conference suggests, you can actually co-produce. And that very soon, we will all get to watch the first official Canadian-Ukrainian co-production. Thank you and enjoy the show. Дякую і бажаю всім приємного перегляду.
Thank you, Richard. That was very inspiring. And you've touched upon those hundreds of project applications that we've received for online pitching. We were indeed positively surprised with this number. And I would just want to mention to those producers who are watching us today, audiovisual producers from Canada and from Ukraine, that you are very welcome to watch the online pitching, which is taking place tomorrow. Out of the 292 projects, 25 were shortlisted and will be presented tomorrow. So it's a great chance to find a project which is of interest and which has the co-production potential. So please register. You can do so at youcancoproduce.com website. You can sign up for the event and you will get an invitation link. So please don't miss this opportunity. The following B2B meetings will be held on November 22nd, and you will have the chance to express the interest in meeting a certain producer. So that's about the pitching. And now it's my pleasure to invite to a welcome word Yulia Shevchuk, the head of the Ukrainian State Film Agency. Пані Юлія, слово вам. Будь ласка, включіть камеру і мікрофон.
So I welcome all of you here, all of the participants and presentees online at this discussion panel. Yes, this year we have begun the co-production treaty with Canada, and I do hope that while implementing it, we'll get lots of wonderful, interesting projects because we have something to make people surprised with and what to offer to the viewer. From our behalf, we can provide support from Ukraine, both for the production, distribution, and showing of screening of the films for the participants of the films in the cinema festivals of A category. As of today, our legislation allows to use such a system of funding like the qualified expenses the return, that is cash rebates. And we have wonderful locations. We do invite all of you not only to shoot, but just to travel throughout our country. And I do hope that the exchange of expertise between Ukraine and Canada will bring use and development, additional development for the sphere, for the industry, and will help to make in order all the new relationship between the countries. So thank you everybody for an opportunity to be present here and to hear something new for ourselves and to share the knowledge, the experience which we got. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Yulia.
you very much. And we will talk to you again in about 30 minutes. So I think we are all set for the conference. Just a few words on the agenda for today. So we are starting with the Ukrainian block. We will listen to the presentations about Ukraine as a filming partner, as a co-producing country for Canada. We will listen to the presentations of Ukrainian State Film Agency and to the representative of our parliament about the regulatory and legal aspects of co-production and the programs available in Ukraine for foreign producers. And then at 6:15, at 6 we will have a break for 15 minutes. And we will digest the information. And after that break, we'll come back again to continue with the Canadian block. And we will learn about Canada as a co-producing country with close to 60 treaties and 60 co-producing partners. We will hear about the support programs and benefits and advantages available for the co-production projects. And also, we will meet the producers of the Canadian, Hungarian, Slovenian co-production project. And we will learn what it is in reality, how it is to create a co-production project. So that's our plan. Let's get started. And I'm pleased to hand it over to Anna Volkova from the Ukrainian Motion Pictures Association to acquaint us with the Ukrainian audiovisual landscape and help us discover Ukraine. Anna, over to you.
Добрий день. Мене чутно?
Hello, do you hear me? Do you see me? Yes, we do. Both. I'm happy to welcome all of you from behalf of the Ukrainian Motion Picture Association. I'd like to express my gratitude to all of the Ukrainian and Canadian partners who have supported this event. We consider that undoubtedly it will become that bridge which can connect Ukrainian and Canadian producers and will become the place, the platform where there will be launched some of the beautiful and strong Ukrainian Canadian projects. My presentation will be begun with a short video about the opportunities which Ukraine opens for our Canadian colleagues. Please, would you show the video?
Canada and Ukraine have ratified the Audiovisual Co-Production Treaty.
From now on, producers from Canada and Ukraine can create wonderful films together, drawing on the support of both countries.
Ukraine has changed its legislation and offers cash rebates for filmmakers now.
It's intensives, 25% plus 5% if it is connected to any Ukrainian story.
Canadian producers may be interested in Ukrainian outdoor locations. There are the High Carpathians and a post-apocalyptic Chernobyl. Ukraine has everything you need, from deserts to medieval castles.
This treaty lays the foundation for strong collaboration on what I am sure will be some very compelling film and television projects.
2 Ukrainian voiceover studios became Netflix official partners this year. It is possible to create anything from feature films, 2 and 3D animation, to augmented reality projects VR.
We have well-prepared staff which have very good creative ideas and very high level of preparation.
Ukrainian producers have experience in co-production. They have made 50 films with Poland, Great Britain, and Germany. Canadian Ambassador Larissa Galadza visited the largest film studio in Eastern Europe.
I saw the trailer for The Rising Hawk, and now I'm out here and I see the set where it was all filmed, and I see how, and I am amazed, I'm impressed with how you went from what's here to what I saw in the movie theater.
So welcome to Ukraine. Hope to see all you here soon.
The treaty between Ukraine and Canada was signed for 5 years with an automatic extension possibility.
Both our countries can't wait to see the first Canada-Ukraine official co-production project. Who will be the first?
Дякую.
Thank you. And now, could you please help me to show my presentation? Thank you. So, it's worth saying that during the last several years, Ukraine is becoming more and more visible at the map of the world audiovisual industry. And it seems to us that it is happening mostly thanks to the common efforts and close cooperation between the Ukrainian state and businesses. Well, in fact, one of the bright examples and case studies of this cooperation is today's event. First and foremost, thanks to this synergy which I'm mentioning about, we managed to improve the investment and production climate in Ukraine, which is undoubtedly was impacted by the update of the legislation about the cinematography and the introduction of the cash-rebates system, and the membership of Ukraine in Euremerge, and of course the signing and the action of the treaty on co-production between the governments of Ukraine and Canada. Secondly, the Ukrainian producers now are better and better proving that they can create the content which can and will be successfully competing and winning all over the world. Could you please show the next slide? For instance, the success of the Ukrainian films witnesses about that at the world festivals of A-class. Those are just several examples. I've mentioned them here, but they are much more numerous. The next slide, please. Our TV series and films, movies, and our formats are traveling all over the world. You can see that here we've presented both feature films and animations and TV series, and the TV series for the platforms, such formats. And also, I would like to say that Ukrainian production services, beginning with VFX to the animation, which are provided by the Ukrainian companies, giants of advertisement, feature and cinema industry from Europe to India and China, also witness about the high quality of the Ukrainian content. For instance, during the recent years, the Ukrainian companies have provided services on the territory of Ukraine to such companies like HBO, Netflix. They took part in the creation of content for the most famous world brands like Apple or Mercedes. By the way, I'd like to add that the market of content in Ukraine has developed significantly from the production and distribution of the ready-made product, content for the global market, to the pre-sales and the work with the international distributors at the early stages of production. For instance, this is what happened, by the way, with the Canadian-Ukrainian project, the Monster Inside, and we have already mentioned it above within this project. And also I'd like to mention that as of today, Ukraine has some experience of work in the most popular formats and genres, and it is so pleasant to understand and to acknowledge that the work of the Ukrainian producers has lots of dozens of different projects at different stages of productions with the companies from all over the world. The next slide, please. That is why our Ukrainian Motion Picture Association always proudly represents Ukraine as the partner for the production of content at all of the main markets all over the world. And answering the question, why Ukraine, we always have rather significant and weightful arguments and answers. The next slide. First of all, because Ukraine is close. The next slide, please. Ukraine is close. Really, you can easily get to Ukraine from the majority of the cities or from all over the world, and to get to our country for the citizens of Canada or the United States or the European Union, the United Kingdom and other countries, you don't need a visa. The next slide, please. Secondly, Ukraine is wonderful and beautiful as the territory of our country is the huge number of unique locations for any request. And here we have not only the Soviet urbanistic and industrial zones, but also wonderful natural recreations, parks and mountains, seas, and lakes, deserts, and lots of other things. We've got lots of seasons, different climate zones, convenient connection between the regions, and all of that, of course, is done in the same jurisdiction. Here at this slide, you can see the QR code, and using it, you can get to the website of the location in Ukraine, which also was done by our Ukrainian Motion Picture Association, and to get to know about all of the locations much more than we have an opportunity to tell about at this event. The next slide, please. Thirdly, Ukraine is incredibly professional. The development of the production infrastructure and the high professional level of the Ukrainian production and post-production services and companies are rather well known in the world, which is acknowledged by our partners from Hollywood, China, Europe, India, because more than 70 technically equipped cinema studios like Film UA, Victoria Film Studio, and others are accessible in Kyiv, Dnipro, Odessa, Lviv, and other biggest cities of Ukraine. There is an opportunity to rent modern technical equipment, set design, catering. As for the props, and as for the post-production services, the next slide tells us about the more than 40 post-production studios which provide the full range of services, beginning with VFX, animation, and any types of post-production, which can be found in Ukraine as well. For instance, such companies as Terminal FX, which has world majors among its customers, and Postmodern Digital with international high-scale projects with the biggest box office projects in the Chinese or Indian distribution, and also the HBO Chernobyl, the fourth nuclear power station block. And also, I can't help mentioning that Ukraine is one of the world leaders in the sphere of the breakthrough innovation technological solutions. The company of Reface is a very bright example of that. But of course, we also have lots of other companies which offer really unique solutions for the whole world. And mostly our partners with whom we are cooperating, they witness that the Ukrainian production and shooting teams are one of the most professional they ever met, one of the most creative and needed at the market. To prove that, I will mention statistical data, as for now, the creative industry in Ukraine provides 30% of the whole export of these services. And also, one more important advantage, would you show the next slide, please? As for Ukraine, it's really cost effective to cooperate with us because we can offer the competitive prices and we can create the projects of the world class, which would be cheaper than the production of any other English speaking country. And those are the projects beginning with animation to the bigger feature films of co-production. The price of the accommodation for the actors, for the shooting crew in Ukraine is more than competitive, as you can see on the slide. So, as for now, the next slide, please. Ukraine has the multi-year experience of work with international projects, with the international shooting crews, the actors and actresses, thanks to our incredible creative approach and experience. In the combination with low expenses of production, we can produce the content of the highest quality, not only for Ukrainian and the Central and Eastern Europe, but also for the world audience. We are open for cooperation with the Canadian producers, so let us create content together.
Thank you, Anna. All sounds and looks very promising. I would say that I have the impression that Ukraine is a perfect startup in terms of co-production. Yeah, there is everything. There are the conditions, there is the enthusiasm, but how about the government approach to co-production in Ukraine? What are the peculiarities? What are the conditions? What is the legal side of it? I invite Alexander Maximchuk, assistant consultant to the chairman of the subcommittee on film and advertising of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, to uncover this for us. Пане Олександре, слово вам.
Mr. Alexander, the floor is yours. Hello, dear colleagues. Do you hear me? Hello, yes, we do. Since the 1st of January of the current year, we have the treaty of the audiovisual content between Canada and Ukraine with the help of the head of our subcommittee and the State Film Agency, which opens huge opportunities for the creation of the bigger scale projects and for the use of all of the tax and other national goods from Canada and Ukraine. We have the presentation about that. Could you please show my presentation? Could you show slide number 2, please? Because this is slide number 4. More. Here it is, thank you. So, the state support of cinematography projects is provided in different ways. The implementing authority for the state support in the cinematography is the State Film Agency of Ukraine. We also have financial support as the cash rebate for the production or the tax incentives, so public procurement when the project is funded from the state for 100%. Also, we have the form of subsidies for the cash rebate. And also we have the VAT exemption, which is the tax incentive for the national films up till 2025. As we can see, the state provides some support in different ways and methods. In particular, the support is given up to 100% if it's the state commission, up to 80% is the commercial potential films, and also the films which are done for the festival distribution, and for the TV series up to 50%. Each project is done with the open competition selection, which is done in 3 stages. A couple of words about the competition itself. The competition is done annually. The state funding volume is also selected annually. The budget is distributed between the categories of the films and different ways of support at the stage of funding during a year. The biggest sum of state support in each of the formats is defined by the Ukrainian State Film Agency, according to their offers. And also we have cash rebates for the qualified expenses at the level of 25%. And also additional 5% can be provided in case of the use of the Ukrainian authentic. The qualified expenses are the expenses which include the production of audiovisual content. The overall sum of cash rebates of all of the projects is also defined by the state budget and distributed project by project for the consideration of the Ukrainian State Film Agency. I need to mention that the projects which can have the claim for the cash rebate, they cannot take part in other types of state support because the law has restricted that one producer can use only one way of support. The next slide, please. The state support can be provided only by the national films. The status of the national films is provided by the Ukrainian Film Agency, and the national film can also have the co-production status as well if you take for the consideration the necessary package of documents, including the treaty on co-production with the partner of the country with whom the treaty about the co-production is signed. Only the Ukrainian producer has the right to provide a request and to apply to submit the application for the Ukrainian Film State Agency if he or she is in the state register of producers. The audiovisual project must score the cultural test and to score a certain number of points according to different criteria defined by law again. Then also it's worth mentioning that any film which is produced in Ukraine should be short or voiced over at least for 90% into Ukrainian or dubbed in Crimean Tatar language. The next slide, please. Slide number 4. So why the treaty? The treaty about the co-production between Canada and Ukraine opens different opportunities for the producers from both countries. In particular, this is the financial support in the production, demonstration, and distribution of the national films in Ukraine and abroad, and also with the incentives and subsidies and some of the tax incentives and exemptions, and also the tax credit programs in Canada during the production and the use of the national films on the territory of Ukraine. I mean the VAT exemption and also the program, tax credit programs in Canada, and also promotion of other spheres. I mean the crossing of the borders and also the support at the international cultural arena of both countries. Tax exemptions for the cinema production in Ukraine. In case of co-production, when we have the conditions of the treaty and the conditions of the Ukrainian legislation, the created film can get the status of the national one, which automatically means that temporarily, where this norm can be found in the tax code, that up till the 1st of January 2025, the operations with the production of the national films in the co-production with Canada will be exempt from VAT. And for further distribution of the film, it will be done as well. As for the tax incentives, it will be told in more details by our Canadian colleagues. Well, the sense is for both states, knowing the important role of the co-production to provide funding for the project created in the co-production. The treaties between those countries helps our producers to expand the borders for the production of the films. Could you please show the next slide? Thank you. The components of the expenditures. Those are the expenditures for the production, which was done in Canada by the Canadian producers, the expenditures for the Canadian staff and creative and technical staff and services during the production of the film in other countries. As for the minimum spendings for both countries, the minimum spending or investment from the Ukrainian or Canadian producer for the bilateral co-production should be at least 15% from the overall budget for the production of the cinema project. In case of the multilateral co-production, the minimum investment or spending of each of the producers should be at least 10% from the overall budget in total. So the participants of the co-production can be done by 2, 3, 4, and more countries. In such case, Ukraine and Canada together need to fund at least 20% from the overall budget, and the rest of the 80% can be done by any other country. For Ukraine, it will be still considered to be a national co-production. As for the place of spending and production, it will be done at the it should be done in the countries for the co-production. The exemptions can be because of some plot lines. The exclusion should be in some creative aim which was created, and it will be done in the consideration of the both sides. The technical services should be provided in both countries, except the cases when the services are not available in both countries. And if the maximum spending budget is not higher than 25% from the overall budget for the production of the film, the shooting should be done in one of the country's co-producers, but also we can have some of the local shootings of the third-party country if it is claimed by the script and it is under consideration of both sides of the contract. The dubbing of the film should be done in Ukrainian or Crimean Tatar or English or French on the territories of the countries of co-production. The film should be having the audiovisual track of one of those languages. And also, Ukraine and Canada took the obligation to help the temporarily entry and location of the creative and technical staff which is involved in the production of the films, and temporary arrival and return of the necessary equipment for the production of the film. Slide number 6, please.
Чи можна брати у команду людей з інших країн?
So can we take some people from the into the team from other countries? If it is the bilateral team, there should be only the staff from 2 countries. Yes, we can involve people from other countries if they are the co-producer of the third party, for instance. And if we have more than two co-producers, the exclusion can be done in the consideration at the level of the treaty or the approval from the authorities of both countries of co-production, and different arguments that it's necessary to involve certain people from the third countries. It should be mentioned separately, and it should be totally excused in the production manner. The production and post-production should be also divided between the countries' co-producers for the co-production, and to get funding, it is compulsory for all of the co-production countries to have at least one national representative involved in the production of the film, besides the producer. 8 key positions which have to be national depending on each type of the film. For the animation, those are director, screenwriter, composer, sound director, lead actor or voice actor, second actor, animation director, storyboard supervisor, film editor, special effects director, and so on. As for the documentaries, it should be director, screenwriter, composer, lead actor, second actor, director of photography, production designer. As for the feature films and series, director, screenwriter, composer. So in fact, the whole main stuff, creative stuff, if I may say so. So it is necessary for the co-production to involve the actors and the shooting crew from the local experts and to invest the spending of the expenditures in each of the countries which are co-productions. Those are expenditures which are distributed proportionally, so the countries have to proportionally distribute the investments equally. To define the key positions, we are using the term of citizen, which is defined in the law of Canada about citizenship, then the creative and technical participants of the co-authors of the film should also be proportionate. The copyrights and the rights and distribution are also distributed between the co-producers proportionally according to their financial share. The same is about the rights and distribution in any other way for the financial share of partner in the volume, as it was mentioned above, at least 15% or 10%, depending on how many countries are the participants in the production of the project. The producers have to provide the distribution on the territory of their country. The next slide, please. Thank you. The next following steps are done in both countries. Ukrainian and Canadian producers have to award an official agreement about the co-production, that is a co-production treaty between themselves. Then the Canadian authority, at least 30 days before filming, is providing the application to Telefilm Canada and also signs the treaty about the description about the expenditures from each of the countries. Then Telefilm Canada considers the application and gives its preliminary recommendations about it. In a year, we have one more application to show the process of the production with the conclusion reports about all of the expenditures used. The recommendations will depend on the mutual consent between Telefilm Canada and their partners. So to get the status of the national film and later the co-production status, the Ukrainian producers are also applying to the Ukrainian State Film Agency with the necessary list of the documents predefined. And also we add the signed agreement about co-production between the producers of both states to get the status of the national film. The audiovisual film should get a certain amount of scores according to the criteria defined by the legislation. In particular, there should be someone from the creative staff or from the technical equipment. She should be the citizen of Ukraine. As for the language of the dubbing, the location of the shooting, and also the film should be the main sound part should consist of Ukrainian or Crimean Tatar languages, which should be at least 90%. The State Film Agency at the production stage is providing the temporary certificate about the status of the national film, and when the shooting is over, the production is over, the producer gets the certificate which is permanent. To get the status of the co-production, you need to provide the copies of all of the treaties signed by the Ukrainian producers with the investors, distributors, with the pre-sales treaties and any other treaties to show the availability of other sources for the funding of the projects and their availability for the funding of the Ukrainian part of the budget. The documents are also submitted for the Ukrainian State Film Agency. And slide number 8, please. And here we can see the list of our Ukrainian cinema associations,
якраз таки
which are also providing the comprehensive support and promote Ukrainian cinematography both in Ukraine and abroad. And also Ukraine, with the support of the Ukrainian State Film Agency, is present at the biggest markets and cinema festivals of the world, in the national centers and like in Cannes, in Berlin, Berlinale, and others. Thank you for your attention. I do hope that I've already mentioned what was needed and what you were interested in. Thank you so much, Mr. Alexander. I'd like to add to your last slide, if I may, to the ways to find partners in Ukraine. I'd like to add that the Embassy of Canada in Ukraine is the potential point of contact. And our commercial department, where I'm working, our task is to promote the treaties signed, the business agreements between the Canadian and Ukrainian producers and cinema producers. So this is a short remark from my behalf. Thank you for such a long speech. Okay, and also I'd like to remind you, all of the participants of our conference, please pose your questions, write your questions in the comments to the broadcast, and we will have 15-minute Q&A block just very soon at about 6 p.m. So, as we already heard, one of the forms of the support, state support of cinematography in Ukraine is cash rebate, or according to the law, the providing of the state subsidy to take back the part of the qualified expenses done by the foreign subject of the cinematography while the production and creation of the movie. As for this topic, with her report, I do give the floor to the first deputy of the head of the State Ukrainian Film Agency, Miss Yulia Shevchuk. Yulia, yes, do you hear me? Do you see me? Yes, we do. Okay, perfect. Let's begin. On the 19th of October, the law is acting, which is regulating the state subsidy for the cash rebates, that is the return of the part of the qualified expenses for the foreign subject of cinematography while production of the film in Ukraine. This is the so-called cash rebate. The foreign subject can get such state support provided while the film is produced with the intermediation of the Ukrainian subject with the reason of the awarded or signed treaty, according to which the Ukrainian subject should be involved in the production of the film on the territory of Ukraine. The reimbursement is foreseen, that is 25 plus 5%. If I can explain what 25% is of the overall budget of the qualified expenses, it is possible according to the following provisions, like remuneration for the employees, the payments for the services for the physical, for the entities and for the private persons. This can be actors and other members of the shooting crews, some of the payments and fees. This can be acquirement of the works or goods or services, the rent for the properties which is necessary for the shooting process, and other expenses which are directly connected with the film production which is produced on the territory of Ukraine. As for the additional reimbursement as 5% from the overall amount of the qualified expenses, it is possible according to the condition that at least 4 cultural criteria from the cultural test are 100% Ukrainian. The film should include the scenes of at least 5% of the whole film with the reading of the books of Ukrainian authors or the characters which their actions, whose actions can help identify the Ukrainian literature books or the events of the aggressor country against Ukraine. So the main condition conditions to get state subsidy is that the expenses should be fully or partially conducted in Ukraine while the production of the film for this person who is providing the activity and registered as the economic entity on the territory of Ukraine. The lack of the residents in the company which is shooting, the foreign company which is shooting on the territory of Ukraine, as for the owners, the members, the shareholders, or the end beneficiaries, and also state officials, the representatives of Ukraine. And the film should have the cultural test with the minimum of 2 points for the cultural criteria and at least 18 points for the production criteria. As for those criteria, we will come back to them later with the examples what it can be. So one of the main conditions to get subsidies that the producer is the foreign subject of the cinematography and should award the project, the treaty with the subject of the cinematography of Ukraine, which is registered as a taxpayer, VAT taxpayer. And also, the expenses, the expenditures should be paid by the people who are paying taxes according to the overall system of tax. The cultural test. How is this done? The subject of cinematography, up till the end of the production of the film, should provide the application with a package of the documents, which includes the director's script, the plan of the production of the film, the budget of the film, the copy of the statute documents to provide the preliminary conclusion about the cultural test. The Council on State Support of Cinematography, which is created at the Ukrainian State Film Agency to help the expert evaluation and assessment of the cinema projects to take the decision to provide that form of state support, assesses the package of the documents, and in 40 days from the application provides the conclusion about the film, whether it has had the cultural test or not. At the second stage, to get the financial support according to this form, the subject of cinematography in a year, during the year after the finalization of the shooting of the film, when we get the preliminary conclusion about the cultural test, gets to the Ukrainian Film Agency about the application, about the final option of the cultural test. In this case, the Council, having considered the package of the documents, is providing the conclusion that the film has had the cultural test and is correspondent to all of the requirements foreseen by the legislation, provides this conclusion to the Ukrainian Film State Agency, and the Ukrainian State Film Agency takes the decision about the provision or the refusal to provide the partial subsidy for the return of the qualified expenses, that is cash rebate. Then we have only the technical part, when the State Film Agency, after such decisions, is providing the payment for the foreign subject of cinematography, the qualified expenses. As for the examples, what cultural test can include? The cultural criteria can include the plot line or the central topic of the film, which should focus upon the modern cultural, social topics of the Ukrainian or European society, or the plot line should be connected with the Ukrainian, European surroundings, I mean architectural, cultural locations, or connected with the topic of solidarity, human rights protection, tolerance, the environmental protection. As for the production criteria, we can use the following point. The shooting should be done in the interior or at the studio at Ukraine, at the pavilions of Ukraine. The number of shooting days and filming days in Ukraine can will impact the number of the points. If it is 10%, that is 2 points for the film. If the number of filming days is 50% and more, then they will get 4 points according to this criterion. The same is about the involvement of the Ukrainian service providers for the preliminary work. It's 1 day, that's 1 point. If at least 50% of the number of preparation period, that is 4 points. For the current year, according to this support form, it was foreseen 30 million hryvnia. And if we speak about the practical implementation of this support form, as of today, we've got only, since the beginning of the action of this law, we have only one application with the cultural test, which is now at the stage of consideration, before they get the preliminary cultural test. So those are all the main conditions to have the cultural necessary procedures to get state support for the cash rebates or the return of the qualified expenses. If you've got any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you, Yulia. So a couple of clarification questions. Yes, sure. Are there any restrictions about the sum of money? For instance, 25 plus 5%, but is there the highest threshold for one film? No, the law did not restrict the amount of the budget of the film. There is only the percent of what the state can reimburse or cash rebate from the expenditure, but the expenditure should be done on the territory of Ukraine. If the subject is coming to shoot the whole film on the territory of Ukraine, then of course we will be speaking about the reimbursement or cash rebate for all of the expenditures done on the territory of Ukraine. If it's partially, then only we are taking the sum of money which is spent in Ukraine for the production. And this sum of money should be spent by the foreign producer, right? Yes, the foreign producer in the co-production with the Ukrainian subject of cinematography. And it is the responsibility of the foreign producer to collect the necessary documents. Could you please tell how he should get all the documents? Should he create some report to understand the administration burden? The administration burden as of today, well, it's not that easy to judge knowing that we have only one project because they have applied with all the necessary budget documentation. If we take all together the whole package of the existing documents, we take since the very beginning, the treaties with the authors, with the shooting crew, with the contractors on the selection of the location of the production of the film, with all the contractors for all of the types of works done on the territory of Ukraine. It can be one contract or 20 or 30 contracts, depending on the number of the companies involved. And if there are any primary documents, well, the primary financial documents should be approved by the audits. It is the usual standard thing for everybody who's working with the money. We've got the question from the audience. Ms. Olena Fetisova. Hello, Yulia. Do I understand correctly that if I'm the co-producer of the project and got the funding from the Ukrainian State Film Agency, I cannot apply for the cash rebate according to about the same project? Yes, the law foresees the norm, the provision that one type of state support for one project. If you got the subsidy for the production, then this is the only form of support. You cannot apply for cash rebates. But could you answer, are there any rules or regulations or maybe recommendations about which form should be selected by the producer? Well, it depends on how the producer can see the implementation of his or her project. If we used to say that the films have been created with the state support and the rights were done, where the state rights at the percent level of the support of the state, then the law which foresees the co-production films and the production of films and series, the producers still have the right, and the producer is obliged just to give back the 50% from the invested by the state for the production of the film. Then the producer makes the decision which story of the state support is better for him or her. Okay, got it. And maybe personally for you, one more question is the following. The system is worked, it's well thought through, but maybe there will be certain questions, especially at the beginning stages, as this is the new way of the Ukrainian-Canadian co-production. Does the Ukrainian Film State Agency have any of the department or, I don't know, contact center, support center where the producers can come and get consultation? Well, of course we have it. Of course, when there are questions, we are also trying to study simultaneously and trying out how different types of support are working, how the new legislation is working. We've got the department which deals with the international activities, including the issues of cash rebates, so-called cash rebates. They help with the consultancies for everybody. You just apply, you just make a phone call, and you can name the issue, what worries you, what's needed. You can do it by the phone call or through the official email. Thank you. There is one more question incoming. It's a bit of the follow-up question of the previous ones, but I'd like to read it out loud. Johnny Fest is asking, if Michael Bay decides to shoot his Transformers in Ukraine only with $200 million, will cash rebate work? 25 plus 5%. What's the highest threshold for the cash rebate? And if several similar projects are coming. Okay, if $200 million, 25% is $50 million. Well, yes, this is a substantial sum of money. We understand that our state budget is not that big. We have, well, it's not a restriction. It's not the limit. Well, it is the limit, but still it's not the limit for the price of the project. We have the state budget for the support of cinematography, which is distributed in the certain percentage between the forms of state support. And this is the only thing it can be restricted by. The amount of money for these photos of support, depending on the form of state support and how we distribute this money between other types of support. So maybe not 25%, but less, right? We do understand that our budgets are not that big in comparison with other ones. One more question is coming. As for the advertisement, do they have the same issues when we are speaking about the ad videos? Well, the rules and regulations are the same without the consideration that's the type, just the TV show, the film, the ad video. That's it. I think there are no questions left for you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. If we've got the questions among the audience to our speakers, we are already in the Q&A block.
Dear participants, producers, if you have any questions, this is the right time to ask them. Questions about Ukraine, primarily. I can see a few here now, and I will invite our speakers to tune in for taking those questions. Питання від
The
Володимира.
question from Volodymyr Kravchuk. Good evening. Are there any movies done in the co-production between Ukraine and Canada, or is it just the beginning of the cooperation?
Тут не зазначено, до кого це питання.
It's not mentioned who this question is for. Oh, let me try to answer, taking into consideration that the treaty was ratified and is acting just since the beginning of the year. Then the practical implementation as the supported or signed projects in the co-production according to this treaty do not exist so far. I think it should be done next year when we finally achieve practical implementation. I do hope that our event today and tomorrow, the pitchings and B2B meetings, will help that. So answering the question, yes, the real co-production projects between Ukraine and Canada, which have been implemented, do not exist so far. We know that there is definitely one project which is getting mature, I would say, as a co-production. I don't know if the speakers would like to mention about it. I will be happily joining them.
Sure.
But so far, we don't have such a case which should be approved as an official co-production. So far, it does not exist. Okay, I'm looking whether there are any other questions left.
We have a question from Dana Lisuk. Thank you all for great information you've presented. It was mentioned that there would be help with importing equipment for productions. Would that be through a carnet process? Так, хто в нас може взяти це питання?
Who can answer the question? The question is about the equipment which is taken and imported, the shooting equipment. How will this process take place from the the customs perspective? Well, yes, do you hear me? Yes. Well, the regulation exists. As for now, we are now taking into consideration the draft of the government which regulates this issue with all of the stakeholders. So I think that soon we will be able to speak about its practical implementation because the projects are sometimes amended and the additions are changed. So before we do that, it's a bit too early to speak about that. But again, the project, the draft is getting ready, and I think that soon it will exist. So we do hope before, yes, at the beginning of the next year, we'll have wonderful case studies. Perfect. How will you select the people for whom you'd provide cash rebates? Yulia, the question to you, I guess. Yes, it's for me again. Well, how? The procedure is described. We've already discussed it. Then I think that it depends on the applications incoming for the return of the qualified expenses. I don't think that practically during one day we'll have 10 projects incoming which will need the money for the return for the cash rebates. I think it will be a gradual period for the implementation of these regulations. Will there be any restrictions for some of the application of the projects during certain months? No, we don't have any restrictions. The only restriction is about a year after the finalization of the production of the film. And then just as for the procedures, the number of the days for the consideration. There are no new questions, it seems to me. One more question here. The above-mentioned co-production treaty, which is signed by co-producers, do you have some template or the list of certain conditions which should be mentioned in this treaty? Some template which will be taken by the Ukrainian Film State Agency, or it is an international type of a document which is done individually in each certain case. We don't have a separate template. How should the co-production treaty or agreement should look like between the co-producers? We don't have such a template. So this is just the agreement between two sides, and that's it. Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, Television Co-Pro would benefit from 50% government funding from the Ukrainian side on Ukrainian expenditures as outlined, but would not qualify for the 25% cash rebate. Yes, Nicola, this is correct, that the project can either apply for financial support from the Ukrainian State Film Agency, or it should apply for the 25 plus 5% cash rebate. So you should choose one of these options. Добре. Нових питань.
Okay, there are no new questions so far. We've got several last minutes to pose the question. If you've got any.
To ask a question, if you have. How long does it take for Ukraine incentives to be paid to the producer? Запитання знову до пані Юлії, я думаю, радше. Скільки часу займає фактична виплата кеш-ребейтів?
Ще раз, я не дуже зрозуміла.
Again, I did not understand the question.
Скільки часу
How
займає
long does it take for Ukraine incentives to be paid to the producer? Since the moment of the application of the documents, well, let us consider since the moment when it is approved. When it is approved that there will be tax rebate, that the project had all the necessary tests and the subject got all of the decisions and conclusions. Since that moment, the payment is done during 10 banking days. Okay, the clarifying question for Yulia. If the co-production is done with Canada for the Ukrainian territory, we have two Ukrainian producers. One got the support from the Ukrainian Film State Agency. Can the second Ukrainian producer apply for cash rebate? No, the project is the same. It's not about the producers, it is about the project. The project is the same, so you cannot apply for two types of support. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions left? I don't see any new questions. If you suddenly invent some new questions, you can write them, you can pose them, and we will be trying to answer them after we finalize the event. But of course, it would be better to do that now. It would be much quicker.
So I guess we do not have any more questions at this point. Дякую, пані Юлія, вам за те, що
Thank you, Yulia, that you answered exhaustively for all of the questions.
I think that if no more questions, we can we can go for a break a little bit earlier. So just let me remind you that we will continue our discussion. We will go to a Canadian block at 6:55 sharp. We will meet here again, 6:55 Kyiv time, or 6:25 in 12 minutes. We will meet here again. It's in Kyiv time, and for Canada, this is going to be 11:25 a.m. We are coming back to this room, and we will listen to our presenters and speakers from Canada. We will discuss the audiovisual landscape in Canada. We will talk about the ecosystem of audiovisual production, and we will talk about the support programs, benefits, and other ways to create films with Canada by also at the same time drawing the support of various resources available. We will have two representatives of Telefilm to open up for that subject. And we will also meet with the practitioners of co-production. We will have the producers of a Canadian, Hungarian, Slovenian co-production project, The Maiden Dance to Death, who will tell us all the realities of creating a co-production project. I thank you all for being with us up to this point, and looking forward to reconnecting in 10 minutes. Thank you. dear attendees, dear participants, producers. I hope 10 minutes was enough to digest the information. So let me remind you that during the past hour, we spoke about Ukraine, about its audiovisual landscape, about the support programs available. And now it is time to discover Canada in terms of co-production. I would like to invite our first speaker of the Canadian bloc, Charolta Chete. Charolta is Director for Development and Corporate Affairs at the Canadian Media Producers Association. And Charolta will connect us closer with the Canadian audiovisual landscape. Charolta, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm working with two screens here with my presentation, so bear with me for 1 second while I share my screen. Hello, everyone. So nice to be here. My name is Charolta Chete, and I'm the Director of Development and Corporate Affairs at the Canadian Media Producers Association, like Daria said. I have a short presentation to share with you to tell a bit about our organization, our industry, our members, and how to work with them. So about the CMPA, we are a national advocacy organization for independent producers, representing hundreds of companies engaged in the development, production, and distribution of English language content made for television, cinema, and digital media channels. We promote the continued success of the Canadian production sector by promoting our members' content, advocating on behalf of our members before federal and provincial governments, negotiating labor agreements with key unions and guilds, and running mentorship programs to foster the careers of Canada's next generation of producers. We also put on Canada's leading industry conference, Primetime in Ottawa, which connects participants working in every area of the industry. We produce a number of publications, including the annual economic report profile and the twice-a-year magazine In the Screen. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about our sector. The Canadian screen content industry is a robust sector that generates significant economic activity. In the 2018-19 fiscal year, the Canadian media production industry reached over 9 billion in the total volume of film and television production. The export value in terms of the amount of foreign revenue collected by the production industry for sales reached almost 6 billion. In the same period, Canada's production industry generated almost 200,000 full-time jobs and almost 13 billion in GDP for the Canadian economy. And I will share a short clip with you to give you a sense of our industry.
From the picturesque peaks of the Rockies to the salty brine of the Atlantic Ocean in the Maritimes, Canada is one of the largest countries in the world. So what is it that connects us? It's our stories, our ability to tell them, and our ability to share them beyond our borders.
Green Gables is real.
Whether we're celebrating our great joys or we're trying to get ourselves through a tough Canadian winter, storytelling is our culture. It's how we define who we are.
Come my way!
It's how we've always figured out our differences, and it's how we bring ourselves closer together.
It feels pretty good.
Because our stories reflect us. They're open, they're inclusive, and it's why there is such a huge demand for our stories around the world.
The first appearances can be deceiving.
Canada's independent production sector is second to none. Our comedies are laugh out loud funny. Our dramas keep you coming back for more. So many of our unscripted series are the guilty pleasure of millions. Our digital storytelling is some of the most innovative, and that's why there is such a global demand for Canadian stories.
You know, I'm very interested in your business.
The production sector drives economic growth right across Canada. If we keep working together, we can make sure that these incredible Canadian stories can keep being told to one another, but also to the rest of the world.
So now I'll just tell you a little bit about what we're doing in the international arena to support our members. We develop various activities that help them extend their businesses internationally. As we all know, to thrive in today's global marketplace, content needs to travel across borders and onto international screens. Canadian production companies have been successful at forging an international reputation for delivering a level of unparalleled production expertise and service. Canada has international co-production treaty agreements and memorandums of understanding with over 60 countries, with new treaties being negotiated continually. So what can Canadian producers offer? As with any co-production, working with Canadian partners will help you share costs and risks and reach a larger audience. Canada makes an excellent co-production partner thanks to a variety of financing sources, including federal and provincial tax credits, excellent location services and diverse locations and landscapes, high standard full service production and post-production facilities, and experienced highly skilled production crews and talent. I really hope this overview piqued your interest in working with our members. So if you're interested in working with the CMPA member, I will show you quickly how to access a list of them. So you're able to search companies by genre, location, or platform, and so on. So I encourage you to take a look and see if you find a partner that you might be interested in working with. We are also available if you have any questions, and also look for our members at major international markets and festivals. Thank you, and I really hope that this co-production forum will lead to many collaborations between Canadian and Ukrainian producers.
Thank you, Sarolta, for this overview. It's great to have an association like that could be a point of contact for the interested Ukrainian producers if they are looking for partners and they don't know where to start from. So I recommend that you take a note of the CMPA, and also, as before, also remember to contact the Trade Commissioner Service, which I represent, if you're looking for a partner in Canada. And importantly, attend tomorrow's pitching, the online pitching for which we shortlisted 25 projects together with a team of international experts. Out of 292 projects, 25 were shortlisted. Those are promising projects, and not only these, but all the rest will be shared electronically. So the next on our agenda, after we've got a sense of a Canadian film landscape, is similarly to the Ukrainian scenario. We would like to hear and to tell you how the treaty co-production work from the Canadian perspective. What are the support programs available? What are the benefits? What is the application process? And how to really take the best from this way of partnership. I would like to invite Susan Kin and Marielle Popolin, who represent Telefilm Canada, Susan King is the analyst for co-production administration and business affairs in co-production at Telefilm Canada, and Marielle Poupelin is the specialist for international business development and national representative for Canada at Eurimage. Hello, Susan. Hello, Marielle. Thanks for joining us. Please unmute and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daria. We'll start off with a brief overview of the treaty and the application process before I hand it over to Marielle to discuss financing opportunities, which is usually what people are most interested in. So I'd like to share a little one-page screen document on the screen and talk briefly about the treaty. And excuse me if I need to figure out how to do that here.
There's a button down the screen which says share screen. Yep, seems to be working. Yes, it works.
Is it there?
Yes, it's there.
Wonderful. Okay, so the Ukraine-Canada Audiovisual Treaty became available for use at the beginning of this year, and we're looking forward to recommending the first Canada-Ukraine co-production soon. The treaty, this is the official name, it was signed in 2019 and was ratified, so it's available for use as of January 1st. The treaty applies to all types of film, television, and video works, so it's a very broad spectrum of projects. Each co-producer must contribute at least 15% of the budget, or at least 10% in a multipartite. A multipartite or tripartite, as it can be called, is a project that uses two treaties, this one, Canada-Ukraine, and another treaty which is in place with either Canada or Ukraine, or both, potentially, and a third country. But in any case, you'd use two treaties to join, and then the minimum participation could go down to 10%. The treaty requires proportionality of expenditures. Essentially, this means that the co-producers should not spend in each other's countries. That's what it boils down to. It does not include any expenses on eligible non-treaty country elements, which we'll talk about in a moment. Each co-producer should own a copyright share equal to the contribution from that country, and revenues should also be split along those lines. Most revenues are shared with each co-producer retaining receipts from their national territory and splitting the rest of the world pro rata. But all the revenues can be pooled and split, or the world may be split up with each co-producer enjoying the revenues from certain territories, which reflect the overall participation from each. It's important to note that when you apply in order to receive a recommendation, the co-producers need to be able to demonstrate the existence of a broadcast or distribution commitment for the national territory. So with regard to the nationality of the participants, the expectation is that everyone working on a project would be either Canadian or Ukrainian. There are, however, some tolerances allowable. Most notably, one key position, the keys are identified in the text of the treaty. One key position at the discretion of the co-producers could be filled by a non-party national. So this is a big advance over most of the older treaties that were signed in previous years. You could get a director, you could get a writer, not always available. So you can even get two key positions on the rare case that your project qualifies as a high budget project. So the level of high budget applicable to the different sorts of projects will be determined by the administrative authorities on a case-by-case basis. And I just want to note that this tolerance is intended to limit the projects which fall into the above average budget range so that they could take advantage of the two key tolerance. But, and I'm going to talk about Article 5.2 of the treaty, you get some openness there for non-key positions where non-party nationals can participate for storyline, creative, or production purposes. Usually this would be related to location shooting, but it could also be for specialized services or skills. and that's not limited like the keys. An executed co-production agreement is also required with the application. We would like applications to be submitted 30 days prior to principal photography. It's not specifically stated in the treaty, but the co-producers should be ready to apply for certification when the project is really going to happen, not at the speculative or development stage. And the applications should be submitted in Canada and in Ukraine at the same time, with, of course, the same details. So the co-production agreement should be between the official co-producers as opposed to parent companies, or you could apply with a parent company having entered into the agreement so long as you have an assignment agreement for all the rights, because the recommendation needs to be given to the official rights holder. The co-production agreement should make reference to the treaty and to each co-producer's contribution as a dollar amount, Ukrainian currency, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce because apologies for that. But the exchange rate should be established at the beginning. Even if it changes by the final recommendation stage, we need to be able to compare the budgets in the two currencies of the co-producing countries. So as mentioned just above, the proportional sharing of copyright ownership and world revenues should be mentioned in the co-production agreement. And finally, either an English or a French version will be made of the project as an original version. And if a second official Canadian language version is to be made, it has to be done in a co-producing country. And there are many more details, but we would invite anybody interested to read the treaty and the guidelines, and feel free to reach out to the co-production office at Telefilm if there are any questions. I'll pass it now to Marielle, who will discuss the financing opportunities.
Hello. Hi, do you hear me properly?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yes.
I'm gonna try to share my screen too. I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to, but if I have a problem, maybe Susan can put it on. So let me check that.
The little center button at the bottom called Share Screen will open up some windows for you, and then you just click on the document.
I just have to find my document. Oh, here we go. There we go. Cool. So you see it properly?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Aholta, for that great presentation to give everybody a global idea of what we're doing in Canada, and also the very good description of the requirement of the treaty by Susan. I think give you a good idea of what we're looking for when you apply for, when you and your partner apply to your authority, because everybody does that in his own country. So what I'm gonna try to explain, it's what is the system in Canada in terms of financing. I want you to know that there is two different systems for TV or for film. It's really different way of financing your projects. I'm gonna focus on specifically the film one, but I will also give you information about the TV one. So Telefilm Canada, as Susan said, we give the preliminary and final recommendation for your project, but we also finance feature film, documentary, animation, documentary for theatrical release, but most of all film is financed by Telefilm Canada. And you need to have that recommendation from Susan's department to get access to Telefilm Canada money, because you need to be a Canadian movie to get access to our money. So we are a federal agency, and in Canada, it's working in the federal level. So you have Telefilm Canada or the Canadian Media Fund with the same, I will say, kind of equivalent for the TV and the new media. And we have the federal tax credit, but you also have a system from the provincial agency, like Soralta explained, she's from Ontario, and the provincial agency also finance film and documentary, and they have their own tax credit. So in Canada, you have many provinces, and around, I will say around 10, and each province has their own system. I will say they're almost the same kind of system, but they have their own agency. So if, for example, you find a partner in Quebec or in Ontario, your partner will apply for the tax credit and the financing in their own province. And because they're Canadian also, they're going to apply at Telefilm Canada for the preliminary and a final recommendation, but also for financing. And everything is cumulative. You can accumulate the federal and the provincial tax credit and financing. You also have the system of the broadcaster and distributors to get your license and minimum guarantee. You have few private funds to help you to close your financing. And finally, as you may know, we also part of RIMAGE with Ukraine. So if you do a co-production with us, together we will be able to apply a RIMAGE and get additional money if you have the chance to be selected. The way it works in terms of financing at Telefilm Canada, and almost the same in each province in terms of equity fund, it's a selective process. So your partner apply at Telefilm Canada. There is, now we just changed a bit of the way we select the project, but there is two, I will say, date of application, and it's a selective advisory committee who give us recommendation, and we take decision based on their recommendation, but also based on the portfolio that we want to have. The level of the money, because a lot of people ask, first of all, they ask, how much can I get if I do a co-production with Canada? Where is the most interesting provinces in terms of tax credits? I won't tell you where to go, and they're very different, but at the same time, I will say the percentage of the tax credits, it's comparable. There is more attractive province, but I think what is very important is to find the best partner more than the best tax credit percentage, because as you may know, it's a very long-term relationship. So it's very important that you find the right partner to your partner. And I will come back to that point a bit later. So you Canadian partner apply at Telefilm Canada and at the provincial agency. And we look at the project and we take decision based on the content, of course, but also the background of the creators, the writer, the directors, but everybody else. The market interest in your project, of course, the community aspect of your, the intention that you have with the community, if it's very specific content, film or TV. So we look very specifically at that content, and we have staff in-house who has that expertise. But it's a selective project. So what I want to mention is that the more Canadian it is, because it's a cultural and competitive selective process, the more money you have chance to get. So I really recommend you to, if you do minority project, if the project is driven by writer and a director from Canada, you have more chance to get finance, of course. And we can go up to, if it's French, for example, you can go up to 3.5 million, or 49% of the Canadian part of the budget, and a bit more if it's a project in English. If it's a minority project for us, that means Ukrainian-driven project, we finance a lot of minority projects, but we're gonna check also all those criteria. So the quality of the content and the background of the company, and how viable is the project also, because we have, what you have to understand is we have, when we decide to go ahead with a project, we have to make sure that the project will be signed before the end of the fiscal year, which is for us the end of March, but we aim to have a contract signed by February. So the latest you apply with your partner at Telefilm for financing, the more complicated it is. Or if it's a minority project for us, you have maybe more chance, because we assume that your part in Ukraine is financed. It's very important to understand the timing, but your partner in Canada are very used to work with those, different timing. So you can, rely on their expertise and the relationship that they have with the Canadian system, because they used to do that. But you have to keep that in mind for sure. In terms of applying for financing and applying for co-production, we recommend that you apply to recommendation when you have enough money, because we won't be able to give a preliminary recommendation up to we're going to wait that your project be financed to 40%, excluding the tax credit. So it has to be, not too late, like at least 30 days before the beginning of the shooting, but you need to have enough financing to apply, and for us to base also our revision of your project for co-production, I will say recommendation. So it's the financing is different. The requirement for the financing are different than the requirement for the co-production. But you need to be Canadian to get money from Telefilm Canada. It's the same thing for the Canadian Media Fund. The money is triggered a bit differently, because it's the broadcaster. We're gonna trigger the project. You need a license, and if it's project that they're looking for, they may add more money coming from their envelope system. It's some kind of a budget reserve for different broadcaster, and they can apply that money on different project, TV, documentary, or media numérique. So the system, it's a bit different because it's not a distributor. They don't apply at Telefilm Canada, but it's a Canadian Media Fund who's gonna give the money to those projects. We do a lot of TV projects, more than film in co-production. We do a lot with France, we do a lot with UK and others. So if, for example, as Susan explained, if you have a project that you started to develop with any UK, for example, or any other country, you can do a tripartite and work and add Canada at the projects. It's never too late, but it's always very interesting to start to work as earlier as possible, because in terms of content development, we're going to be more attractive for the distributor of the broadcaster. It's often a good idea to start as soon as you can. I may answer the question if there is a question, because we could talk for hours, but I'm going to try to, I want to mention and to talk about finding a co-producer partner, because it's a very important element in your wedding with Canada. So you can use our directory, like Sarolta explained, they have their own directory, but for the co-production directory, it's really on our website, because we are the administrative authority who give recommendation for all the co-production who use 3D in Canada, so TV, film, animation, documentary, fiction, it's all there. So you can go on our link and find who did co-production with which country. That could help you to find companies. We also, so you have the same thing with the Canadian Media Fund, and we have on our website, and I will recommend you to register to our international website we call RDV Canada. I don't know if it's there. I think maybe at the end, yes, just right here. You can go on that website where you will find all the activity we have on the international market and festival. And many of our producers registered there. We have often pavilion, and you can follow them, you can contact them and see where they are, what they have in development, and how to connect with them. So it's a very interesting tool, and you can get our newsletter to follow what we're doing. So I'm going to just come back here to find a partner. So as I said, you can, I didn't check the time. I will, I don't know if I'm on time. So you can visit our co-production market organized in Canada. You can visit our pavilion that we have in different festivals. Those one are the one in Canada. So if you're coming at Frontier, for example, with more genre movie, or if you come for hot dogs or Festival du Nouveau Cinéma Anywhere, we have many, there is a good way to find our partner. It's very important. So I really recommend you to take time to find a good partner, to make sure that you have on the same level of value, budget level, timing, because it's a question of affinity between you both, and it takes time, but usually it's really is enjoyable, and it gives you access to a broader audience, broader talent for you and for us. It's a pleasure to collaborate with other, talent in terms of content, but also technician and actors. I also want to mention that this year it's new. We are open to a project with not in French, English, or indigenous languages. So we could eventually finance a project who's shot in Ukrainian. It's possible. It's still going to be selective, but it's a new possibility with us. So I wanted to mention that, especially when Canada, it's a minority project. Voila, I think I'm going to stop here, and maybe, sorry if I've been a bit long, Daria. I hope not too much. And if there is any question, we're here to answer to your question. Thank you very much for your attention and to have invited us to that panel.
Thank you so much, Marielle and Susan. And I know that it's a very short time. 20 minutes is definitely not enough to cover all the aspects, but I appreciate the extensive information and very specific information that you have provided. And I have to say that we have really many questions already in the chat. So please stay with us until the Q&A block. There are some good questions from the audience, which we'd like to ask you to take. And thank you once again. And now it is time for us to meet the producers who have the experience in co-production, not with the Ukraine, I hope not yet, but with the Eastern European countries. And from what we know, the project that we are going to discuss involved a lot of different co-production aspects, I would say. So it was a complex project, and it led to a great result. So I would like to hand it over to our producers, to Michael Dobbin, producer at Quiet Revolution Pictures,
and to his partner in crime, I want to say, but to his partner in this wonderful project, Andrew Hills, who's the writer, director, and producer. So Andre, Michael, please tell us the story, how it all happened, what were the co-production peculiarities, and are you happy? Are you going to repeat the same with Ukraine?
Thank you for having us here to present.
Thank you.
It's nice to see you, Andre. We haven't seen each other in a few years.
It's nice to see you too. I see you have a different poster of the same film behind you.
There we go. Yeah. Dragged that up this morning. I don't know, does it make sense to show the trailer first, maybe, to give a little context?
Yes, sure. Yes, we can put on the trailer. Let's do it.
All right.
We will do it on our end. No worries.
Thank you.
So let's see what is the project we're talking about.
Come here, Steve. This is all wrong. Why are you here?
I have this great idea for a show.
Az ő művészeik stadionokat töltenek meg nálunk. Miért nem tudunk mi stadionokat megtölteni nálunk?
How is Julius?
Fine. And don't call him again unless you can afford a better lawyer.
I've heard him. Bad. És tudod, mennyire hiányoztál?
Mennyire?
Értékenység, irigység, eljegyzés az ördöggel.
Ide jössz, felkavarsz mindent és lelépsz. Ha felkérnek táncolni, táncolsz.
Good ones. So this film's now 10 years old. I think it was released. It was released in 2011. We produced this in 2010. And Andrew, I think you and I met. I'm thinking it was probably around 2008. Does that make sense?
Something like that, yeah.
The Berlin Film Festival. So this film was beautifully, even at script stage, it's all about two brothers reuniting. It's set in the 1990s after the Iron Curtain came down, and Andre's character has come back from North America to kind of, I don't want to give too much away, but it's all centered around this dance performance, which is stunningly done, and the choreography was really astounding. And we had our cinematographer was Vilmos Sigmund, the late Vilmos Sigmund, who is an Oscar-winning cinematographer. It's amazing to have a chance to work with him. But Andrew, you should tell us just a little bit about how the story came to be, because you wrote, you produced, you ended up being cast in the film, which I don't think was how we intended it, but anyway.
No. In my previous experience, what I found was for international co-productions, there are two major mistakes you can make. One of them is to make it so esoterical that nobody can relate to it. And the other mistake you can make is to make it so generic that nobody can relate to it. So we can't compete really with Hollywood with the resources we have in Europe. And if we try, it's doomed to be a failure. So the reason why I found this project apt for a co-production, because it was very specific to the Hungarian culture, with the Hungarian folk dance being used as a vehicle to deliver the story. At the same time, it compared the two cultures. There are two brothers who grew up the same way, who had the same skills, even loved the same woman. And there is only one difference, was one decision during the communist period when one of them left the country and the other one remained. And they each had to make their own compromises, betrayals, and life decisions that defined who they were. Now, instead of discussing that, they come together to do a production together, and all these conflicts come through the work, and all the emotional underlying emotions are expressed in the dance. So I felt, and obviously Michael did too, that this would be something that both countries can relate to, and in fact other countries as well. And one of the interesting elements I found afterwards is how it was received in various places, because in Eastern Europe, it was perceived that the brother who stayed in Hungary was the hero of the movie. And everybody saw the story from his point of view. In Western Europe and in the diaspora, it was perceived that it's the older brother who left is the hero of the story, who goes back to take revenge or settle things, as it were. And he was the viewpoint that they used to see the whole movie. But there were other areas, like we went to India with it, that had no relationship to this whole situation and the Cold War. And they saw it as a pure dance film. And that's how they viewed it. And it went to Japan, where they didn't really care for the dance film either. They saw it as a family drama. And in fact, in the Tokyo Film Festival, there is one scene where the father of these two brothers shows up. And one of the an old man stood up after the screening and said, this whole movie should have been about the father. And that was their perspective. And I think in that sense, it was a success for that.
It was. I mean, this film played, I think, 32 festivals in 20 countries.
Something like that.
It did exceptionally well, and as you say, it was received very, very differently in each country. And I think what I found interesting was how life imitated art in these backstories of how history was addressed in the film. But anyway, onwards and upwards. I mean, I guess as far as how this project came to be. This, as mentioned, Andrew and I met around probably 2008, I think, in Berlin, and pitched me the project, sort of on behalf of the Hungarian producer, Gábor Gármi, And I remember being quite taken with the script. And I think initially the story I think was set in New York and Budapest. And I somehow convinced you to set it in Montreal instead of New York, partly for budget, but partly because I felt it would be a little more genuine than trying to. In Canada, we're often shooting U.S. locations, making Canada look like U.S. locations. But I think in this case, it worked very well because we sort of had the sister cities, the two mountains in the middle, and the two brothers looking at each other. Anyway. So we decided to work together, and then it got into the negotiations with the Hungarian company, and then interestingly, we had a Slovenian co-producer as well, Igor, who's I don't know if he's still producing, but he's had a good chat with him the other day. At the time when we went to structure this co-production, the story is that the Hungarian-Canadian treaty had been suspended temporarily. And I've heard all kinds of stories and speculation about what really happened, but I think the story was that someone had been doing some due diligence in the archives and found that the actual paperwork had never been officially signed, something like that. One could only speculate what happened. So that was remedied. But unfortunately, guess what was happening while we were shooting in 2010? The treaty was not available. So we were able to structure the co-production through Slovenia, through one of our minority partners, because Slovenia has a treaty with Hungary. Canada did not. Originally, it was going to be a tripartite agreement. And the Slovenian treaty, interestingly, I think we were the first company to ever use it. It's essentially a de facto continuance of the Yugoslavia treaty, a country that doesn't exist anymore, but Slovenia adopted the same terms. Thankfully we did, because from the Canadian point of view of the qualification through telefilm, as our colleagues will remember potentially, this was a 30% Canadian production and a 70% Slovenian production, technically, from Canada's point of view. Yes, so the paperwork, the certification we got says 70% Slovenia, when in reality Slovenia was 20%, Hungary was 50%, Canada was 30%. But for the purposes of qualifying the treaty, we had to use the Slovenian treaty because Slovenia and Hungary, I believe it was under the European Convention, and that all tied together nicely. So the reality is that although there's a lot of red tape to go through, genuinely our the people at Telefilm do want to say yes to us, and they did find a way. And what were you going to say, Andre?
Oh, I wanted to say that it's even more complicated from our point of view, because at the time, Eurimage did not extend to Canada. So we had to get at least 70% of our budget out of Europe. And Slovenia didn't have any money. So the other thing was that you needed at least 2 European partners to apply for Eurimage. So we needed somebody else. And then the same festival in Berlin where I met you, I met Igor. And he said, yeah, I'm happy to be a partner so that you can qualify for Eurimage, but we don't have any money. And so finally what they did, they gave us they had studio capacity, and they paid their own personnel, and that was about 10% of the budget. Hungary gave 50%, Canada gave 30%, so we had a 10% gap. And that's what Eurimage and media filled up. And
maybe backtracking a little bit, just to explain to our viewers here that I believe this film had something like 21 different financial partners in 3 countries. I remember doing the financial structure. So Eurimage, we were a Eurimage funded production. But again, Canada, as Andrew pointed out, was not yet a member of Eurimage at that point. So we were considered a third country. But we had the Hungarian Film Fund, the Slovenian Film Fund, we had various tax credits, Eurimage, media, Ontario, what's now called Ontario Creates, had put some funding in. We'd had some private equity. It was
Quebec as well.
We filmed partly in Montreal and some in Ottawa. So it was amazing that it all came together. And I think the way the way that it did work was because it was a very, what I'd say, a very clean co-production. There weren't a lot of costs of people traveling between territories. You know, we hired Hungarian crew in Hungary, Slovenian crews in Slovenia, Canadian in Canada, and not very many people traveled in between. I think it was.
Well, in Canada, there were only 3 people traveling to Canada. It was Vilmos, his assistant, and myself.
That's
and everybody
right.
else was local.
That's right.
So that's that was an advantage.
I quickly jump in with a budget-related question. What was the total budget of the film, and how long did it take you to understand that you can go forward, that you have everything in terms of budget, that you have secured the funding you want?
Well, I think the budget. Go ahead, Andre. You should.
You know, it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle game and it's a timing game.
You still don't know.
Well, in terms of how much the budget was, it's impossible to tell because we worked in 4 different currencies, in euros, in dollars, in Canadian dollars, and Hungarian forints. And the relationship of the dollar to the euro has changed dramatically during the shoots. At the beginning, it was 80 European cents to the dollar. At the end, it was 1.8 dollars to the euro, so almost doubled the difference. So the beginning budget and the ending budget were completely impossible to compare.
I think officially, you know, for the purposes of certification, I think we ended up at around 2.2 million in euros, I think, if I remember correctly, and then it was close to 3 million in Canadian. And I think we're all very, very proud of the fact that we pulled off such an amazing production as far as production value for that budget. And to this day, I still have, with great respect and love, I have my colleagues at Telefilm and other funding agencies tell me constantly, oh, well, everybody knows you can't do a co-production for under 5 million. And they say this to me, and I sort of have to.
Well, the other elements is very important is in this puzzle is that you get one of the funding, but they also have an expiration date. So I would recommend everybody to start fighting on all fronts at the same time, because one of the problems we faced at the end, and which basically is responsible for my being in the film, is we were waiting for Eurimage, and then we had 1 month when we got the Eurimage funding to start the film. So it was like immediately, we had to start immediately, and we had trouble casting one of the characters, and the only way we could actually start the film was by my standing in and doing the role. Which I don't know. I mean, it's just.
Well, it was interesting that we to cast that role, Andre. You remember we went through quite a few interesting names, some that were not available when we wanted to shoot, and the requirement was that we had to have someone who could act, obviously, and who could speak fluently in Hungarian and English, and that of the playing age and was available, so that the scope was quite limited of the number of actors we could go to. And Andre, you're a professional actor as well, so I think it was sort of the elephant in the room. Why were we not putting you in the film?
Well, because I wanted to direct, so it's hard to be on both sides of the camera. But the film also shot in 4 different languages, so it's an added problem. And but actually, one of the limitations that we had to use Slovenian actors in Slovenia and Canadian actors in Canada worked beautifully for our purposes, because we got to have local stars as well as local distribution in those countries. So which was facilitated by the local stars. And Canada obviously has American, quote unquote, American stars. So you can get actors who are well known around the world and raise your visibility.
And that's probably a very good point to sort of end on, wrap things up, is the fact that, statistically, co-productions tend to perform very well internationally, because although we've seen, especially in recent years, how localized content really is getting an amazing push from, streamers like Netflix, for example, will produce local content, and that then travels very well because it's very genuine and very significant culturally. when you're involved in a co-production, you're having a big aspect of the treaty is creative collaboration as well. So it's not just about financing and points. It's also about making sure that each producer has a meaningful input into the story. And this film really became a good example of that. And because those that feedback's coming from different cultures, it's more likely to be able to pass muster in other countries and other audiences. So never forget, I guess my sort of parting advice would be to say don't try to find a co-production scenario and find a story to fit it. It's better to find the right story and try to find the co-production structure that supports that and is going to help you. You can't fund a film on tax credits. You've got to fund it on the merit of the project, which is going to help you get funding, and it is very competitive. So Canada is a great place to co-produce with, but it's not just about money. It's about finding that creative collaboration as well. And your passion. The passion, yes.
It has to be a passion project, yes. Otherwise, you're not going to have the stamina to see it through, and be prepared for bureaucracy, because it's there on every turn.
It's true.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing the story. Are you happy with the result? I mean, with the way you did internationally? Is there something that you think you should have done differently if you were to replicate the experience?
Andrew, why don't you go?
I was delighted, and we had wonderful response. The film has played on every continent, and we had very, very different and very positive responses everywhere. So I think it's the best possible outcome for the circumstances and the project that we could have.
And I'm with you, Andrew. I mean, and the film did perform. I mean, as with many independent films, it's very hard to see, this film didn't, do commercially wasn't as successful, I think, as it had the potential to be. But it did very, very well. And the fact that I'm very happy to say that this is, again, it's been 10 years and the film still holds, and it's still finding audiences. And I think, I'm not sure what kind of streaming services are available in the Ukraine right now, but I mean, the film is coming out, I believe it might be on Netflix Europe, I think, next year. And it's on some of the, other streaming platforms. You can find it legally, I hope. But people are still finding it and still talking about it. And I think this was the first feature that I'd produced under my new company at the time. 3 countries and 4 countries, I guess, and 21 financial partners. And, everything seemed a bit simpler from there in the sense that I think anyone that's new to co-production and coming into co-production are going to see this wall of potential bureaucracy. But like I said, the funders and the certifiers, they want to say yes to you. You just have to have the patience to understand what they need from you and how to make it work.
Exactly. So the key is that the government institution and the government, they want to support you, but be patient, right? And follow the guidelines. Thank you once again. Yeah.
And just turn over every stone, because it sounds like a fortuitous thing that Michael and I met, but I have been to several festivals before looking for partners and couldn't find one. And then that one Berlin festival, I just went to the Canadian embassy, had this reception for co-production meetings, and ran into Michael, and it just happened. And the next day I went back to the festival and met Igor, and it came together. But there were a lot of other occasions where it didn't. So you just have to be patient with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. All the great takeaways. Thanks so much. We are actually in the middle of the Q&A block somehow now, and we have many questions, so I will have to ask them quickly. So we'll start with questions to Susan and Mariel. So the first one is from Samaya. Hello, how is third country co-producer regulated? Are their cast and crew also recognized as partner country nationals?
Yes, the in a multipartite project, we have what we call the pivot country. So let's say if Canada is the pivot country, so we've got Canada, Ukraine, and then another country. Canada, once we finished our review of the project, we would contact the administrative authority in Ukraine and in the other country. So that country, each of the Ukraine and the other country, whichever it is, would follow their treaty, and we would review it under the terms of both of the treaties. So it goes back to what Michael had talked about of his project, which because the Hungarian treaty was not ratified at the time when the project was made, this Canada-Slovenia, it was a bipartite project, although really it was a multipartite, but from the Canadian perspective, we pooled the Slovenian and Hungarian side so that Slovenia was the pivot country on that project.
All right, thank you. Next question from Nicola. Is it required that Canadian producers maintain 51% ownership of the project?
Not under the treaties.
I would think so.
No, the treaty, half the treaties have a copyright ownership requirement. The Canada-Ukraine requires that each co-producer own copyright in proportion to its contribution. So at least 15%, but whatever the percentage is.
What about the collaboration with Netflix, HBO, and other big studios? Is it possible to include them in the projects of this program? And there is a next similar question. Can the projects be implemented in other countries beyond Ukraine and Canada? For example, the US, the studios with the US. So what's the situation with the US?
That's sort of a two-part question. So first of all, there is no treaty with the US. The US doesn't have co-production treaties with any other countries. So the involvement of any US studio is not really allowed under any treaty with Canada. There couldn't be a producer from the US. However, on the financing side of things, the treaties have no restriction on where you get your financing, and we're very happy if any co-production project can attract international financing. So if a US distributor comes on board, that's great. That's financing that you can place on either side of the financial structure. And so you attract the financing, and then you can't give producers, but there are courtesy credits which are actually quite generous that can be offered to non-supervisory, non-decision making, non-creative roles that are involved with financing or distribution.
Thank you. If my project already has funding, but it's only 50%, can this program, I would assume, can any program be another sponsor for another 50%? How many sponsors can there be? How does it work usually? So there is a project with 50% funding secured, and there is a gap of 50%. Can this program be another sponsor? I would think that can potentially a support program by Telefilm or by other sources complement the missing 50%?
Well, maybe I can try to answer. First of all, well, if the project respects the requirement of the treaty in terms of minimum and all of that, there is no issue. After that, it's a selective program, so it's not. So let's say it's missing half of the budget and the financing. Of course, the Canadian products are going to apply, and we're going to look at the content and the project in general, who is behind, if he has a distributor, how big is the budget, because sometimes we change our requirement regarding to the level of the budget in terms of distribution. But yes, so if that's why I tried to explain between being a majority Canadian project compared to minority. Everything is eligible, but we're going to look at the project and all the element composing the project. in terms of content, background, distribution, etc., etc. So it's the system, it's the selection system, it's the same. There is not a how much you ask. As I mentioned, if you ask for 3 million, and if a director and a writer from Ukraine, it may be complicated because it's a cultural fund. But yeah, there is not a specific requirement in terms of level of money that you need before you come and apply. What I just want to maybe, Daria, add for the Netflix financing, we haven't, for Canadian project, seen a lot of Netflix within the financial structure, maybe after when they buy the project, but within, because it has to be a Canadian project to get finance at Telefilm Canada. So we may see some kind of issue with IP, if there is. So that could be something interesting to see, but we haven't seen that, and it may be a problem at the stage of production.
Thank you. In reviewing applications, are there any genres that are given a priority?
For financing, no. We try to have a large portfolio. We finance a lot of different projects, and genre movies included in it. It's really a question of quality and package, you know, circulation and distribution.
And is there any sort of cycle of reviewing applications, or is this done on a rolling basis?
For the treaty recognition.
Sorry, no, go ahead, Suzanne. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for treaty recognition, it's two separate programs. So the treaty recognition is one program. It's neutral. There's no content review. It's simply evaluating if the project is in conformity with the treaty. And then you have a recommendation, which will unlock your federal tax credit. All the other forms of financing are subject to the rules of that particular program, but many of them require that the project be branded as Canadian, which is what happens with the treaty. It becomes a national project, thus eligible to apply to any Canadian financing sources. But as far as the treaty goes, we're happy if you can collect financing from anywhere in the world. There's no content and there's no source of financing review involved in that.
Are there any dates, like the deadlines when the application has to be made?
We suggest 30 days prior to principal photography. The Canada-Ukraine treaty doesn't say that specifically, but many of our treaties do say 30 days prior, and we suggest that even if it's not stated explicitly in the treaty, because that gives us time to take a look at the project, and if there is any issue, we will ask the producers to make a change. We don't reject applications. We will, you know, try to find a way to make it work, and that could take a while. I mean, I've had applications on my desks that have lasted years, but ideally, our goal is to provide a recommendation within 2 months of receipt of the application.
Thank you. I think there are no more questions related to the application process or financing. There's a question from Michael Dubbin. If you would be proposed to consider a project from Ukraine for co-production, what would be important for you to know and to consider to make a positive decision?
It's a very good question. It's very hard to answer, other than you know it when you see it. But a really good story. The language doesn't necessarily matter, but we try to find connections to an English-speaking audience or French-speaking audience, and we do need usually some attachments in place, either some financing, if you have an idea of who the director is going to be, who the actors are going to be, and where you see a place for Canada as part of that structure. So, are you looking to do post-production in Canada? Are you looking to film in Canada? Sometimes you don't know till you have the conversation, but starts with a really good story and something that we know we can get to an audience, because it's such hard work to get films made and distributed these days. If it's something that you think is going to be successful, it's likely we're going to it's contagious, right? Enthusiasm is contagious. So if you're enthusiastic about it, we'll probably be as well.
All right.
Excuse me, Daria, can I just add a little things about that? What is interesting, I mean, for the producer, there is producer listen to us, is that there is different places where Canadians are going. So if there is a film de genre, they can come at Fantasia Frontières in Montreal, and there is co-production market where they can pitch and meet producers at the early stage. Same thing in Cannes or in Berlin, or even like East Meets West in Italy. There is different rendezvous, I will say, where you really can meet people and pitch your project. I think it's a very good way to meet and find the good producer for you. Because it takes time, as Michael and Henri said, it takes time, it's complex, you really need to have the same vision, the same timing. So there is different places like that where you can go, or also look at what we organize between countries when we do matchmaking like we did, like you did, Daria, in Berlin. I think it's very useful, but you did way more than we did. It's very useful a platform to put people together and exchange their project, because one minority project could be a good timing, even if it's not a really Ukrainian one, but it bring maybe another 1, 2, or 3 years after. So it's a build-up relationship.
Another takeaway, don't neglect an opportunity to meet with new potential partners, and you never know, maybe you work with them this time or in 5 years from now. So yeah, those networking opportunities are really worthwhile. Thank you so much. I think we don't have questions, and we actually ran out of time because we had so many things to discuss. Thank you to our speakers, Mariel, Susan, Michael, Andrea, Charolta, everyone on the Ukrainian side who we listened to in the first part. And let me also thank at this point our partners for the entire program, not only for this conference, but for the presentation that we did at the Toronto Film Festival and Kyiv Media Week, for tomorrow's online pitching, and for the B2B Day on November 22nd. All of this wouldn't have been possible without the support of our partners, who are the Ukrainian State Film Agency, Telefilm Canada, Canadian Media Producers Association, Department of Canadian Heritage, and Ukrainian Motion Picture Association, and the organization who helped us implement all of this technically, Media Resources Management. So I thank everyone for joining us today. We will have this conference recorded, and we will publish the link to the recording on our website. We will collect all the useful materials and we'll share them as well. And I remind you that tomorrow is the online pitching. Don't miss it, as we've just discussed. It can be tomorrow that you find a perfect project and a perfect partner. So I hope to see all of you tomorrow, and wish you a wonderful evening. And thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Nice to